Hey, what's going on? Ryan Nolting here with another episode of The Outsiders. We are going to talk about the very influential band, the MC5. So the MC5 is founded in 1964 by Fred Sonic Smith and Wayne Kramer. They invite Rob Tyner to the band. They round the rest of the lineup with Michael Davis, who plays bass, and David Thompson on drums. They're from Detroit. They're from the Lincoln Park area of Detroit. And, they're influenced early on by Chuck Berry, by the Ventures, by some avant-garde jazz like Coltrane. These guys are kind of greasers. They're kind of hoods. They're rebels. They are outsiders. They dabble in some criminal activity. As the band is kind of formulating their sound and talking about what kind of band they want to do, Wayne Kramer, Fred Smith, and Rob Tyner go to a restaurant. They have dinner, and Fred's saying, "Hey, I want to be an unapologetically, arrogant and powerful band." And he knocks over a glass of water or beer, and Rob says, "That's not cool." He's like, "That's not gonna get it done just by being arrogant." So they decide to go out in the parking lot and fight about it, while Wayne Kramer watches them fight, and they square off, and Fred, connects with a punch, and then Rob connects with a punch, and it's snowing and icy out in Detroit. They end up on the ground, and ultimately Fred has Rob on the ground, and he's like, I could really knock you out right now. I could just level you. And Rob's like, well, why don't you do it? And it kind of floors Fred. And they get up, and the three of them get in the car and drive around all night for 5 hours, and they really bond over this moment. Fighting's not going to help them become a band, and I think it just shows you kind of where their heads are with this kind of greaser, rough, industrial city mentality. They're playing VFW halls and dances, and back in the 60s, dancing's huge, and getting a crowd to be able to dance is important. They're honing their skills in these Battle of the Bands, the WKNR Battle of the Bands, and they start formulating a bit of a sound. They have a Vox PA system, okay, that the singer, Rob sings through, and Kramer always explains to him that the red wire is the hot wire, and the black is the common wire. So they come up with a riff, and they call it black to common, right? And they realize when they play this song in front of people, they can clear a room. They can get everybody in the whole place to leave within 30 seconds, and in a good way is how Kramer explains that. They can affect people. And, this is 1966. They're playing heavier music. Yeah, there's Cream out there and some bands that are starting to play heavy music. Russ Gibbs purchases a 1930s ballroom in Detroit called the Grandie Ballroom in 1966. And this becomes their home base. They become the house band for the Grandie Ballroom. During the week, they can use that as a rehearsal space, and they can play on the weekends. They can open up for people. This place becomes kind of the mecca of the Detroit music scene, kind of a laboratory and a church and a place for people to get together and party. Some of the posters and things that Gary Grimshaw makes, and the light shows, and the whole counterculture movement all over the country starting to take place in 66 and 67. And again, drugs and live music is becoming, more and more popular with young people. And there's ballrooms all over the country, the Fillmore, in San Francisco and one in New York. And the Grandy's right up there, it's kind of the Midwestern mecca of live music. Um, you know, uh, John Sinclair is a guy that's huge in the Detroit scene at this time. He's a left wing jazz poet, kind of a beatnik. He's an outsider too. He's an artist. He's a left wing kind of radical political guy, and he's a legend. He's still alive to this day. They decide that if they can hook up with Sinclair, they can get the hippies to like their music. So they know they can get some of the rougher guys coming off their shift at GM and Ford and come into the Grandy and listen to this hard edge music. But if they can get the hippies and the counterculture to accept their music also, they're going to win on both fronts. And that's what they do. They get John Sinclair to manage them. And he's their manager from 1967 to 1969. He's running a counterculture commune, really, in Detroit. So, now that they have Sinclair on board, they're able to all move in to an abandoned building where Sinclair's commune is. This is near the Grandy Ballroom. Sinclair's always getting in trouble with whether it's weed or just running his mouth. He's got the band's getting media attention because Sinclair's getting media attention. And even if some of that media attention is negative, as they say, any attention is good attention when it comes to trying to develop a career. In April of 67, there's a love-in that is held on Belle Isle in the Detroit River, and the MC5 is booked to play. They play. Some bikers come in. They start raising some hell, and this love-in becomes a scene where cops are beating on people, cracking skulls. Here's some posters of the MC5 back then, right? And again, here, you got Rob and Wayne and the rest of the guys. Anyway, so, this becomes a situation. Again, there's a riot essentially on Belle Isle. The MC5 are involved in it. More and more, attention from the cops. That same year, acid is starting to creep into the culture too. So more and more drugs are being experimented with. Wayne Kramer's starting to dress up on stage and wear crazy costumes. On July 23rd of 67, there's a riot in Detroit. This riot is, the National Guard has to be brought in. It's the cops against the common man in Detroit. Hundreds and hundreds of buildings are burned down. Maybe 1,000 buildings are burnt down. It really changes downtown Detroit forever. People are fleeing the city. But they're right involved in it. John Sinclair, outside of one of his buildings, puts "Burn, Baby, Burn" on a sign, inciting more of that type of radical behavior. Again, he's the manager of the band. Tanks are rolled through the streets of Detroit right up to their place where they're living, and the cannons are aimed at their place. I mean, literally, the National Guard comes all the way up to their place, all the way up to the door. They said, "We heard there was sniper fire from your roof." That was a bunch of bullshit. And Sinclair ultimately tells them to get off his property. That's not before the National Guard and the U.S. government calls him by name, and it scares the hell out of him because they know who he is. He's on the radar of not only Detroit, but now the White House, now the FBI. The music's becoming more political, okay? They're still playing the Grandy Ballroom. They're opening up for Blue Cheer. They're opening up for Cream. They're opening up for Hendrix. They're opening up for the Yardbirds. And they're trying to blow these bands off stage. I mean, they are reveling in the fact that they can get up there, open the show up. They're building a reputation of kick out the jams, motherfucker. Get off our stage, get down or get out. And these bands are complaining to Russ Gibbs. They're like, this band that's opening up for us, they're crazy. And they are, taunting us essentially. But it's part of their, they're running with the ego. They're not virtuosic musicians. But it's real. The energy is real and what they're singing about. Again, there's tons of weed being introduced. And they go berserk on stage. I mean, they have a weed ritual before the show that is insane. They're hitting the stage and they have a message, and that message is to go absolutely crazy on stage. And they're basically saying fuck the police years before fuck the police became a slogan. And they're getting harassed by the cops. They have their van that has MC5 on the side of it. It gets firebombed. The building next to their place where they're all living gets firebombed. The music's getting more aggressive. I mean, it's emulating the Vietnam violence that's going on by 68. Detroit's getting too dangerous for the MC5 at this point. And they move to Ann Arbor. And they move into a commune house. And this next year allows them to get out of that scene. It allows them to write some material for what would become their albums. The music's getting better. They're also becoming better musicians. It's getting more complex. In 1968, they're invited by the counterculture, to perform a free show in the park for the Democratic National Convention. All the hippie bands from San Francisco are supposed to show up. The MC5 are the only ones that show up. All those Jefferson Airplanes and Deads, they don't even bother to show up. Ultimately, they perform in the park and they hightail it out of there because as soon as they get out of there, tear gas is going and there's a riot in the streets of Chicago at the National Convention. They are now with the national exposure. So it's no longer just a Detroit exposure of this band. They're getting national headlines for this convention and the riots that follow it. They get in the ear of Rolling Stone magazine. They get in the ear of Elektra Records, and ultimately they get signed by Elektra Records. Danny Fields is the guy that really pushes for them. Not only does the MC5 get signed, but another band that we're going to talk about gets signed called the Stooges. Of course, Iggy Pop is the front man there. Subscribe to my channel, by the way. This is Ryan Nolting. We do these shows almost every day on this channel. They are counterculture rebels at this point. They're singing about something that matters to them. Sinclair is a little bit further to the left than some of the guys are in this band. The rhythm section, Michael Davis and Dennis Thompson would suggest that they've resented all the political stuff. Sinclair starts something, a White Panthers party, similar to the Black Panthers party, which is basically saying, we're going to have a revolution and we're going to change by whatever means necessary. In October 30th and 31st of 1968, they record this album, which is a live album at the Grandy Ballroom. It's a free show. And this is basically what becomes their first record. They do end up putting 3 studio albums out after this, but this is their seminal recording. This has Ramblin' Rose, which Kramer sings after an awesome introduction about testifying by one of their friends. And then, of course, Kick Out the Jams. Come Together is an awesome song off this record. Rock Reducer number 62. Flip the Album Over. Borderline's an awesome song on this record. Motor City Burning, of course, in response to the riots. They did not write that song, but it's an awesome song. Starship closes this record out, which is an exploration. Again, the concept of leaving this earth and going somewhere else to escape. Rob Tyner, Wayne Kramer, Fred Sonic Smith, Michael Davis, and Dennis Thompson. Ultimately, what happens to this band is for another day to tell that story. But, they have a sad ending. They're really at their peak at that first album. And by 1970, and that's in 69, by 1972, the band's done. Kramer's the only man that's still left in that band that's alive. All those other guys kind of died tragically of illnesses or heart attacks. And anyway, the MC5 is a band that needs to be appreciated more, in my opinion. They're not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Did they start punk? They certainly were one of the bands that started punk. I mean, 1966, 1970 is pretty early. Also, some heavy metal and hard rock is introduced here. And these guys are pioneers. Are they the best musicians in the world? Absolutely not. But you don't have to be great to make an impact. You don't technically have to be great to make an impact. When you have a message and you're convicted of what you're doing, sometimes that type of power is more believable than anything else. Subscribe to my channel. Thanks a lot for letting me rap here about the MC5, Detroit punk. Peace out. Have a good one.